Welcome to the High Context Podcast.
Conversations about living a full spectrum life.
My name is Ace.
And I'm Darian.
And we are sitting down with folks who inspire us daily as we dive deep into a wide range of topics, from art, music, history, and science,
to culture, consciousness, and creativity.
All with a focus on the collective while tapping into the individual and our relationships and connections to each other.
We like to think global while we act local.
Get in touch by sending us an email, highcontextpodcast@gmail.com.
Or follow us on Instagram, where you can find some archived live videos of our recording sessions at High Context Podcast.
We hope you enjoy these reflections as much as we enjoyed sitting down for these dangerous yet important conversations.
We look forward to connecting with you soon.
All power to all the people.
Okay.
And
I think Mercer, that sounds familiar from somewhere in Fredericksburg. I think there's a Mercer,
okay.
Something having to do with health sciences.
Yeah, I see that name quite a bit throughout the country, so I wonder what that family was about, because it's not a super common name, but like.
But it all seems like academically.
Yeah.
Health sciences.
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
In a way.
For sure.
Sorry, for some
At
reason
least
that's
my
like itching.
interfacing.
With you talking about Virginia, I'm like,
yeah.
I'm having a moment of like kind of being back in Virginia myself.
But yeah, working at St. John's, applied with him, and then the rest is history. I worked for him for 7 years, and then
WashU?
Yeah, at WashU.
Okay.
Doing bench research, and we didn't make any grand discoveries. I did do some cool research with an enzyme called luciferase, which is the enzyme that allows fireflies to light up.
Oh,
And so
firefly.
I was engineering DNA, and then engineered that gene into some other DNA that we were looking at that had like a knockout gene, basically, and then we would put that into cells or put that into like a model animal, whether that was a frog or a mouse, and then harvest the cells. And what we could do afterwards is introduce like a certain medium, and then it would glow. Like if the certain protein we were looking for was there, it would glow because it had the luciferase in it, and that was really dope.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Illuminating.
Yeah, illuminating. Yeah, exactly.
So you're at WashU for 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
and are you producing music through this time?
Yeah, so the first time I made a beat was at Mizzou. I think it was 2004, whenever the D4L Laffy Taffy song came out. Because I remember being a DJ. I'd started DJing in 1999, my senior year in high school, and kind of off and on. A little bit in college, here and there. A few parties at Hampton, a few parties at Mizzou. I had my turntable set up always. But that song came out, and I was like, man, I can make a better beat than this. It was just so simple. I was like, I know I can make a better beat than that. So I bought an Alesis SR16, it's a little drum machine, and I started making it. Was literally only drums. It doesn't have any other sounds on it, because I didn't understand what it meant to make a full song at that point. But that's what started it. And then later, when I bought my house, which was 2008, I got a first-time homebuyer's tax credit, and so I used that to buy some music equipment.
Okay, gotcha.
And so I got a laptop, and so I started making like beats in GarageBand from there.
Gotcha. So we're like on a 15-year journey on making music, making beats.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Time flies.
I mean,
wow. Golly.
As long as you're moving and breathing and making moves.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm enjoying it. So,
yeah. So you're doing this like science research at the same time as developing this skill through making beats and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't know you had this whole science background, so I'm curious where your path moved more into music and community.
I'd say probably, well, it was a sequence of events. Because I was just working and not really doing much else, I was like, I need to volunteer, do something to like give back. I'm just always, I don't know why that's always in me, but it's always in me to try to help people. And
well,
so
I mean, I believe it's a civic duty.
I feel like if you're receiving, right? So you should be producing and giving back at some level too. So I ended up volunteering with a program called Urban Future at the time, and it was one-on-one mentoring, and that's actually where my book came from. Is the motivation for that was the young man named Earl that I was mentoring was a really great kid, but he was struggling because his like cousins and classmates were like starting to drink and do drugs and get in gangs and get pregnant, and he would come to me and ask me about those things because he wasn't really comfortable asking his mom, single mom, who was just kind of getting into a relationship. She ended up marrying the guy that she was dating when we first met. By the time me and Earl, the program kind of ended because he graduated 8th grade, and then once that happens, the program's over. And you can start over again with a new student if you want to, but if you're a mentor, but the kids just kind of go on to high school. And so that happened. Then I was like, oh, I really should be out here in the community because like there's more kids like him. But that also motivated me to write about his story. And that was 2012 I guess 2011 that I started writing the book. I mentored with him from 2008 to 2010.
Tell me about your book.
So my book's called The Dying Breed, Volume 1, because it's meant to be a series. It's about a young man named Deshaun who is an artist. I wanted him to be something non-traditional because at least the literature that I read about most black kids is about them being in sports or them being a rapper or whatever. You know, like Biggie said, you either singing crack rock or you got a wicked jump shot, right? I didn't want it to be like that, right? I didn't want him to be in trouble. I didn't want him the character, to like have to be the person experiencing the actual pitfalls, right? But he's surrounded by people that are, and similar to Earl, similar to me too, because like I consider myself a lot like Earl, where I probably could have gotten in way more trouble than I did as a kid, but it was really because of my parents and their upbringing that kind of had that little thing in my consciousness to like not go so far. Deshaun is similar to that, so he uses art to kind of escape through the story. He's using it to better his family situation. And so I wanted to kind of give an example to other kids that are reading it. You don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be an engineer, you don't have to be an athlete. You know, you can be something that people probably say will never make any money and still be okay, right? And that's what the book is mostly about. But the year after that was written and published, Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida. That kind of opened my eyes. Again, I had been harassed by police before, but never obviously to that degree. And so that's what brought me further into community. So I was like marching and protesting, and then I guess I kind of started organizing. I joined a group called the Universal African Peoples Organization at that time and was like volunteering with them, but also kind of volunteering with the Organization for Black Struggle and just any other group that seemed to be working on the ground trying to better the situation for black people in general, because I figure if we lift black people up, everybody's raising up because we're kind of at the bottom. And so it was that sequence of events that kind of really brought me further into community. I was still missing something, and it was music. I was honestly kind of super, I don't know, levels of depression, who knows, right? But I knew I was depressed because I had gotten there one time when I was at Mizzou before, and to the point where my friends were like, bro, we got to bring you out of your room. Because I wasn't doing well in school, and it was really bugging me. Because I don't like doing poorly at things, and I was always a good student, so it was really bugging me that I couldn't do that. And so
you were discouraged.
Yeah, I was so discouraged that I didn't want to leave my room. And so I got to that point again working at WashU. And so, but I didn't have as strong of a network that I could just like call on. So I just kind of, not as sort of so religious, but like my understanding of God, whatever, the universe, I was just saying a prayer over and over. Use me how you would. I don't know what you have in store for me, but use me how you would. And that ended up taking me to playing, roundabout story, playing intramural football with a friend of mine named Jason, and then he was like, it's been my dream all my life to start an independent record label. And I was like, oh, really? Because I just started making beats again. And he's like, oh, yeah, I do too. And we ended up having the same exact white MacBook and using GarageBand. And I was like, okay, there's something here, so I need to follow this. And so we ended up starting a company called Burst Utility Media Group way back in the day, because I always think probably way too far in the future. So I was like, it's not just going to be music. It'll be music, it'll be film, it'll be fashion, it'll be all this stuff. So I was like, let's just call it media, because that allows us to do a lot of different things. And then he ended up moving away because his wife was intern at WashU Med, and then her residency ended up being in Colorado. So I was sitting here with a music company, but it was just me. And we made a bunch of beats, but like it wasn't really anything you could put out, so to speak. And one of my friends from Hampton just ended up graduating at that time. She graduated a little bit behind me because I had met her when I was visiting Hampton, not when I went there. When she lived in Chicago, and she was kind of disillusioned with the music scene in Chicago. She had just helped mix the 10-day project for Chance, and some other people wanted her to work with them, but they didn't approach it in a way that made her feel comfortable. And so I was like, well, if you move to St. Louis, it's a lot smaller of a market. We can make a name for you, blah, 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 this and that. So it took about a year, and she ended up moving here. And so that was the continuation of what I like to call BMG. And this is like 2012, 2013. And if you remember in 2011, there was a big governmental financial cliff. It was called the sequestration at the time. I believe they let it go over the cliff, whatever. So WashU lost about $10 million in national research funding from the NIH. And so they went around to each principal investigator and were like, you need to apply for your own funding. We just don't have the same funding we could give you before. And my boss decided, or you could either apply for your own funding, get your own funding, or close your lab. And so my boss decided to close the lab. I actually found out roundabout, he didn't even tell me till 2 months before it was supposed to close. But luckily, one of our collaborators told me in July of that year. So I started kind of preparing. But I had been going to like music shows and like just like networking with people in the music scene here and like things like that for Lauren, really. But when the lab closed, it was like, well, should I go to another lab or should I take a leap of faith and do some music stuff? And at that time, I had met Damon Davis, who was running Farfetch at the time, and we had met up about something totally different. But then he was like, well, I'd actually like you to help me run this organization. And so at the beginning of 2014, I started running the Farfetch Music Collective.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then 2014 happens.
Yeah. Lots happened in 2014, but the major event that happened for me that year was Mike Brown being murdered in Ferguson. I don't know if you want me to tell the context for myself about that story.
Your perspective.
But yeah, I remember... Yeah, I remember being somewhere else. I had an event. I was just very busy at the time. Just working with Farfetch kept me really busy. And seeing it on Twitter... because I followed Tef Poe, still do. And he, I think at the time, was living up that way. He was at the apartments when it happened. And so when I got home, I went and turned on the news to see, Mike Brown's body still lying in the street, even hours after I had initially heard about it, which was pretty wild. I was like, I feel like this is going to be another one of those where just like it happens and then it's going to pass through the news cycle. In a week, we're going to be talking about something else. And I just kind of continued to follow Tef's. I was at home. I was living at my parents' house at the time, in between living with my friend and then this was in between living in my own house and then moving to the city. Tef's pictures just kept coming through on the Twitter feed, and it was like, okay, there's a candlelight vigil. Okay, cool. They're setting candlelights out. And Mike had been collected. His body had been collected by the coroner and things like that, and they were having a vigil. And then as it kept going on, I couldn't look at anything else. I was just like watching that, and then I started to see like police in the pictures, and I was like, what's happening now? And then I saw a tank, and I was like one of those big tanks that they had. I was like, okay. And then I saw dogs, like officers with dogs. And I was like, what is happening? And I really couldn't tell because it was just Twitter. It's just like him posting a picture. And at first he had some commentary, but I think after a while he just didn't have enough time to like type about it. So I was just like watching the pictures and I was like, oh my God, what's happening? And so I planned to go out there the next day. And then in the late news cycle, that was when the QT had set the QT on fire that night because the police had agitated, to my understanding, a peaceful candlelight vigil, and people were justifiably upset. And so that was
Tef Poe was in the same apartments as Mike Brown in this time?
I think he was...
I'm
not sure. Yeah, he was... Yeah. At the time, he was in Canfield.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was living there, but I believe he lived around there, and he was working in the... Antonio French had an office building in the strip mall that was across the street from Canfield, and I know he was doing some work out of there, some organizing.
Did you or Tef know Mike Brown?
I did not. I believe Tef did in passing. Like, I don't think he knew him well, but like he talked about him like he knew him and had seen him before in the neighborhood. So
then you're seeing this transpire through social media and the news, and you're seeing peaceful congregation of people mourning for a loss of someone in their community being then agitated by police.
Yeah.
Where does it go from there for you? I mean, we know that police involvement didn't necessarily just all of a sudden stop, and
Mm-hmm.
that we know that the protests were for, not just the right to protest, but to shed light on the injustices of how those in the position of authority treat their constituents of color.
And can abuse that authority. Yeah, the next step for me was like, I got to go out there. After the QT went up, I was like, oh, this is bigger than I thought. I still thought that it would pass through the news cycle, but I was like, oh, this is bigger for St. Louis, at least, than I thought. So the next day, I was out in Ferguson at 10 a.m. I was out in front of the police department protesting, and then kind of catching the lay of the land for organizing. So that's...
What does protesting in front of the police department look like to you? Are you holding a sign?
Holding a sign, chanting, sometimes holding space in the street. It's like a 2-lane street with a turn lane in the middle. So it's not hard to block. Yeah, all those things. And
Ferguson
Police Department, yep. But I found out that wasn't really the hot spot that day, because I know people are organizing. I was like, I don't see any of them out here. What's going on? So I found out that Greater St. Mark's was allowing the organizers that I knew to kind of like use their school as like a home base to like have water. And at the time that everything kind of popped off, people, I feel like it was teenagers, but I don't know, somebody from Gaza had tweeted a bunch of things informationally to us, like how to make a gas mask out of a 2-liter bottle, how to neutralize the gas, and that was like water and Malox. And so we were getting this information via Twitter from people that were seeing what was happening on the news. And so we would stock up on those types of supplies and then keep them in the school at Greater St. Mark's.
So we're also seeing what accessibility to knowledge and the application of that knowledge in real time.
Yeah.
Like no gatekeeping of knowledge.
For real.
And the facilitation through social media of someone from a different country.
Yeah. Yeah. If it weren't for them, I don't even know if we would have known where to look for that information. Yeah. Yeah. But it was really because of Twitter. It was so wild to me. But
well, and this is when we're looking at world news.
Mm-hmm.
This is a few years, like 3 years after social media inspires the revolution in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. The Arab Spring, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
Which was in 2011.
Yeah, I think people are paying more attention to it as...
I mean, using social media as a tool.
Yeah, as a tool.
To share that knowledge and make it accessible. And also,
he didn't have as high of a profile at that time. He was a pretty well-known local rapper, organizer, but he was not. Yeah. He was not known nationally or internationally at that point. So they had to either be looking at hashtags or just paying attention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, local to national news to world news to, then the hashtag. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of hashtags and Twitter, something I didn't really recognize until when I was deciding to move to St. Louis was that Jack Dorsey is from St. Louis.
Yes, indeed. The inventor or the creator of Twitter. And Square. Which is kind of wild. Same dude. That's a smart dude.
Yeah.
Or at least very intuitive.
Put him on the list for the podcast.
Yeah, for real. Maybe we could get him on. Jack Dorsey, if you ever hear this, please.
We'll be in touch. Yeah. So you're getting information from those abroad, from Gaza, on safety precautions when protesting against authorities that are abusing power and working to prevent protests, no matter how peaceful it is.
Yeah.
So you get to that school, you're there with TEF, you're working on supplies. Where's your life going from there?
I was just like, wherever you can use my mind or effort, please do. And so I started off just being on the safety team, what we call the safety team. And that was like people that weren't on the front line protesting, but were at Greater St. Mark's and would have like, we didn't have walkie-talkies, but like people would be able to text and kind of like send a voice message back and forth every once in a while. And so if anything was going down and people were getting gas, we would be the people that come out with like a case of water and all the Malox to like neutralize. And then that turned into, being on the safety team turned into meeting with a group called the Hands Up Don't Shoot Coalition. And that was like, I'd say 50 or more organizations from around the Horn, anything you could think of, from Veterans for Peace to the Reform Congregation with the Jewish folks, the Jewish faith, the Advancement Project, Anti-Defamation League. There's just so many. Pretty much every major organization you could think of had a representative in this coalition. And so I just started organizing with them, kind of just as a individual. I didn't really have an organization I was representing, but they had asked Damon to make the logo. And so he brought me for that meeting, but then they were like, oh, you're smart. You should stay here and help us organize. That turned into helping organize Ferguson October in conjunction with Maurice Mitchell, who came down from New York to help us really understand what like large-scale organizing looked like. And then, after Ferguson October, I really was just organizing for like a year and a half, from August 10th to like November of the next year. I was just in organizing meetings, probably multiple in a day, or at actions every single day.
And all relating to Hands Up Don't Shoot Coalition and
just the general movement that was happening. Yeah, because we had Mike Brown be killed, but then not long after that, because G.B. Powell was killed. Not long after that, Von Myers was killed, all in St. Louis. So like all unarmed by the police. So it started to be like kind of a citywide movement. And we were moving all around. But it was all Hands Up Don't Shoot was like the major impetus behind a lot of the actions, because we were organizing the actions in that space. And then that turned into what we called St. Louis Action Council. Greater St. Mark's let us meet at St. Mark's just like lead organizers. So we didn't have multiple actions on the same day that were conflicting, but we want the same people, or we want a crowd here. You're splitting it. So like, we were just coordinating to make sure that actions were making sense and we weren't running around chasing our tails. That turned into what is now Action St. Louis.
Gotcha, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at like late 2015 into the following year
Mm-hmm.
and Action St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And are you still producing music in this time, or are you just all in organizing?
That's an interesting question, because at a certain point, I think it was 2015, Damon and I had realized that we had dropped the ball with Farfetch. We weren't really promoting it. We weren't helping the artists as much. We were just like full on organizing. And we had a conversation. It's like, well, we both can't keep doing this if we want Farfetch to last, right? And so it's like, well, he was already doing some national speaking gigs and things like that. I was like, you're further along than me as far as like the notoriety and the things that we're trying to push. So you go ahead and do that. I'm going to kind of pivot back into Farfetch. So like, I'd say late 2015, early 2016. I was still organizing, but it wasn't like an everyday thing. It was like, I will make what I can. I'll DJ here and there for events, but I got to focus on our business. And so that's when I kind of like pivoted back into focusing on Farfetched.
Gotcha. So 2016, getting back into Farfetched.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're kind of entrenching yourself more in the music scene, music community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What artists are you working for with at Farfetched?
At that time, it was like Blank Generation, Cave of Swords, Matthias and the Pirates, a little bit of Thelonious Kryptonite, who's now in New Orleans. We had a guy from out of town in Indiana, Evansville, Indiana, named Kyle, who went by Walkie Talkie, that we were working with. And we were doing shows out of town there, which was really dope because it was a college campus. And at that time, that was pretty much it. But the work that we were doing started to attract other artists.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So moving...
Scrub. Let me not forget Scrub.
Mm-hmm. Moving on from there, like, how did Farfetch develop? What did it look like? What did it sound like?
Yeah. It developed. It got really big. We ended up gaining probably like 7 or 8 more acts in the next year. Yeah. I looking back on it, it's like mind blowing. But when you're doing it, it's just like, oh yeah, this is what we're supposed to do. So yes,
you got more acts on.
More acts.
It got bigger.
The way we developed. So I had a friend that worked in the music industry in LA, and when we were starting out, I went and got some advice from him. And basically, he was like, you need to get everybody on the team. If you have merch, everybody needs to be wearing the merch. Everybody should have stickers. Because as far as branding goes, it will help you and all of you collectively if everybody is kind of showing a united front. And so we started developing merchandise and things like that. But we contained and then recruited or attracted some of the best talent to me in St. Louis at the time. So because of that, they got more shows, and I was starting to handle some of the bookings and like negotiations and things like that for them. But for the most part, the artists were able to book their own shows and stuff like that. So because of them getting more popular, because of their strength that they exuded, it was like the brand Farfetch got stronger. And so we started to develop into opening for national acts. Like I had Abnormal open for Moonchild when they came. When Talib Kweli came here to do something for one of the rallies for Ferguson, Scripts and Screws got back together, really, to open up for them. We had Adult Fur open up for No Such Thing. I think those are the most notable things. At the end, well, not the end, near the end, we attracted artists like Tonina and Katera, Accurate, Subtle Aggression, Hands and Feet, Stephen Favaza, who used to go by Hands and Feet. He's in a band called Future Modern now. There's more, but I can't remember. We had like 15 acts. Yeah. But yeah, we were starting to get on festivals. When Loop Fest was a thing, one year we had like 4 different acts involved. And we're starting to go around the country. We're doing shows in Kansas City, Chicago, LA, New York, Evansville. And in Missouri, we're doing it in like Columbia, Springfield, Cape Girardeau. And like the word was starting to spread about Farfetch and things like that. So... But the music industry was changing, so I really kind of tried to get people ready for licensing and was trying to think of other vehicles that could get the music out. So we started to look at how we could create like film projects that we include our music in. I ended up producing a short film called We Live. I think that was started in 2019 and then finished in 2021 because of the pandemic. But okay. That was the one film project that I did complete with that, and I may pick it up again for certain media, but that was kind of the development. Was like, well, we got a good foothold in the music scene, everybody is kind of like using our acts, but like how can we get out to the masses? And I was like, let's start to create some of our own media to get it out there. And so
where is Farfetch now?
It is defunct. Damon and I had a pretty nasty falling out, and I haven't talked to him in almost 3 years. And so there was a official announcement in the news, St. Louis Public Radio, and I think the Riverfront Times in, I want to say, April of 22, almost a year later, after it really kind of fell apart. That was March 21. But it still exists on the internet. Like, you can find the catalog. You can find We Live on the Farfetch YouTube, and anything Farfetch is still, for the most part, yeah, pretty much archived, except for the website. I think the website is no longer in service.
You mentioned certain media. How did that come about?
Yeah, so that came about because I had a business mentor named Rajan, and so at the time he was advising us with Farfetch to have an LLC run our LLC, so there was multiple layers of protection legally. And so I started a LLC called Wealthy Mindset at the time to kind of like help coach people that were starting businesses, because they had seen how successful Farfetch was becoming, and they were like, oh, I want to start a business. Can you help me start? And so I started that. That didn't, to me, sound like a media company. So I wanted a media end of Wealthy Mindset to be able to like make content, make music, and things like that. So I was running a studio project at the time, and then I asked my team for for brand name ideas, and we kind of went through a focus group process to hone it down, and it ended up being Certain Media.
Gotcha. And so is Certain Media something that you're still working on now?
Yes. Yeah. That is the media company. That will be everything that I produce media wise will come out through that. The documentary. It may be joint ventures with the books, because I just got a literary agent, so there might be another publisher. But like Certain Media will be the publisher for my books. All the content that we put out is branded Certain Media. When we put out this, I'll probably have Certain Media be a partner for high context and sound activism and everything like that.
Well, we were talking about your origin story. Mm-hmm. I think we're kind of at the tail end of it, because we talked a little bit about the end of your father's life, mm-hmm. and got diving into your family history already in mm-hmm. these past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first off, a fun question.
Okay.
Talking about your origin story.
Yeah.
So, if you're a superhero, what would your superpower be?
I think about this a lot, and it honestly changes from day to day.
What gets you thinking about it? Why? Why think about? Is there things you want to change in the world?
I'm only one person, and I feel like if I was a super being, I would be able to do more.
Okay, in what way? Are you saying you're going to duplicate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, duplication is a power that I've thought about having. I already get tired doing the things that I'm already doing. So I'm like, if I'm getting tired doing this, but I want to do more, right? There's always more I want to be able to do. So that's what makes me think about, well, what if I had this superpower? You know, teleportation is another one that is near and dear to my heart as far as like efficiency. But I've also thought about being invisible. I think that was more so when I was in a mode of like not wanting to outshine people, but I think that's an insecurity in itself, right? It's like, oh, you might outshine people, but I haven't done anything, right? So like, how do I even know that that could be a possibility? So it's like me keeping myself from doing the things I want to do at the level that I want to do because I feel like I might, take away from other people. Then I was like, oh, but if what's for me is for me and what's for other people is for them, doing what is for me doesn't take away from other people. So, and I also see that it kind of motivates people. Honestly, me being a DJ has motivated people to do their own creative projects, which is wild to me because I've been doing it since I've known them in high school. But they all have they're working in an insurance company or, selling cars or whatever. And they're like, I don't like this job. I want to do something else. And then they branch off. And they're like, sometimes they will come to me and be like, man, you motivated me because you still DJ and you do this and you make music and you do that. So I forgot the question.
No, you kind of answered what would be your superpower.
Yeah, my superpower, yeah.
You mentioned on sound activism. Mm-hmm. What does that phrase and the concept behind it, what does that mean to you?
Well, for me, sound activism is multi-layered. Sound activism takes me back to kind of what we were just talking about with the organizing is like, you need to have sound principles going into organizing people. When you're dealing with people, you have a huge responsibility. Life is such a precious thing. It can be taken away within a split second, right? It's created within a split second, right? So that temporal nature of it means that if I'm organizing for people and I put them in danger, I could potentially be putting them at risk of losing their life.
Putting the mission in danger.
Yeah, putting the mission in danger. And I think ultimately the mission is for everybody to do better, to be doing better. And so there's principles that are proven to work in organizing, and if you're not using them, then your activism is probably not, number one, it's not as strong as it should be, but it will probably lead you to a place that you don't necessarily want to go. A lot of cults are formed off of not sound activism. The other layer that sticks out to me mostly is sound activism, right? So like in relation to sounds, music, vibrations, and if we're vibrations, right, we're making a sound, right? Using that sound to make a better world, to be active in our community. Because to me, everyone should be an activist. When people claim themselves as activists, it makes me cringe. It makes me cringe because everybody should be active in their community. That's what an activist is to me. And if you're claiming to be an activist, it's like, okay, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. I remember a joke Chris Rock used to say, so you want a cookie? Mm-hmm. Like, okay, cool. Like, yes, you should be an activist. So creating sounds, curating sounds, understanding sounds is not a thing that everybody can do, right? So we can use the sounds that we know of and experience and create to maybe motivate people to want to be active.
So thank you so much for filling me in on all of that because I moved to St. Louis in 2015 and so I only knew a little bit of the story of 2014. I knew people who had organized, but I have never had an opportunity necessarily to request that we sit down and we talk about it and we kind of lay it all out. Mm-hmm.
I don't often get to do that either, so that's good. Thank you.
The other thing we didn't mention on was your time at KDHX. We mentioned your paying role in it, but tell me about what your radio show on KDHX was about.
Yes, I did have a volunteer radio show called The Bridge with Wes Gray and DJ Wiz. I was one of 2 co-hosts. Shout out to Wes Gray. And it was about bridging the gap. I love older music, older quote-unquote music, especially from the 60s and 70s. And so a lot of that music was sampled by hip-hop that I love in the 90s, but it's also being sampled now by newer music. And so my concept was, and because Wes is about, I think he's a decade younger than me, because he was listening to younger artists and things like that, I was sort of educating him about the older music, not necessarily the hip hop, because he loved hip hop, but the like James Browns and Aretha Franklin's and people like that.
Building blocks.
Yeah. And so just our conversations led me to be like, oh, that could be a cool thing on the radio. And so that's what we did. And it was great, man. It was one of my favorite things to do in the world. I honestly, if KDHX didn't have the issues that it did, I would have kept doing it. Like, we had the best callers, man. Like, they were knowledgeable, and like just their love of the music. I remember the quintessential experience from that show was when we got a handwritten card to KDHX from a 90-year-old woman. It was so funny because she even had some things crossed out because she wrote it wrong, because she listened to the Cardinals on KMOV on Thursday evenings, especially during the summer. And apparently her great-grandchildren had told her about our show. And she wrote a card that said, I used to listen to KMOV, and she crossed it out. Or no, I used to listen to KMOV and listen to the Cardinals every Thursday. But now I listen to KMOV, crossed it out because she listened to KMOV all the time. Wrote KDHX. I listened to KDHX, and I just listened to these boys talk about hip-hop. And it's brought me and my great-grandchildren together. And I was like, that is the point. That's the whole point.
Do you have it framed?
I have it somewhere. I don't have it framed.
Yeah.
It's definitely in a book, like, I don't know. Everything's been moved around. But yeah, I definitely have it, and it's still in that original envelope. But I was like, that's why we do it. Yeah. I want people that, like, listen to Motown when it was new to be listening to this show with kids that are listening to Ari Lennox or Tierra Whack or somebody like that, or Cardi B even now, who's sampling some of those old tracks with the person that listened to Motown at the same time, and they both get something from it. Because like a lot of times we would explain a little bit of historical perspective or the new perspective, like this artist was thinking this when they made this track, so they sampled this for this reason or whatever. And I think everybody got something out of it.
Explain the context about the production.
Exactly. We would tell what record label it was on, what year it was produced, all those things, so that you could have as many touch points, whatever information you like to hear about an artist. We were trying to give that.
Nice.
And then make those connections.
I really appreciate your time on KDHX too for leading that and for being engaged in the community in the ways that you were.
For sure.
What have you found that has helped you live a full spectrum life?
A couple things. I honestly think cannabis helps, but meditation. I started meditating regularly last year. I wouldn't say heavily because I don't get to do it as much as I'd like to, but meditation.
What is meditation to you? For someone who's never heard the word or never experienced
That's a good point.
What is meditation for you?
Because I thought it was something different before I started doing it too. I thought it was like what I think of as astral travel, right? Like you
out of body.
Yeah, you're gonna have this out of body experience. You're gonna go to a place, right? Once you get in this zone. But what I've understood it to be is really just understanding what's in your inner being, right? Like going within. Just really focusing on the breath so that you don't focus on anything else. And then you're open, right? You are at that moment with and part of everything else. To me, at least spiritually, I feel like I cease to be an individual. I'm just part of the greater ether, if that makes sense, the greater universe. Sometimes I get messages, like, intuitively, like I wasn't even thinking about a thing, and like something will come in. And one time, well, I wouldn't say this is meditating, it's more like sensory deprivation because I did a float. One time I had a vision.
That may help. I mean, sensory deprivation can lead the way to meditating. I mean, when I think about meditation, there's plenty of different ways to do it, but, an intro to meditation would be close your eyes.
I think that's what happened. I think I was in a meditative state because what happened was I had a vision of an artist I knew and was working with, Larry Lovelace. That was another artist that was on Farfetch I couldn't think of. I had a vision of him, and he was playing with a band I'd never seen him with before, and he was doing some Michael Jackson. It took a while, but it was like 2 years later.
Yeah, tell us where you're at in the deprivation tank. Like, what year is it, and what project are you on?
So this would have been, when did I discover Float? 2017, late 2017, and then.
So you're working with.
I'm working with Farfetch. With Farfetch.
And then you have this vision of Larry.
I had this vision of Larry, and this is I was at Float. Shout out to Float STL.
Yeah. And
he was doing that performance. And then maybe a couple years later, he invited me to a performance at off Broadway. And he was performing with Sean Kanan's Voodoo Band, or whatever they call themselves.
The Voodoo Players.
Yeah, Voodoo Players, thank you. They were doing a tribute to someone else, but he decided to do 2 Michael Jackson songs. And one of them was The Vision. And I was like, yo, yeah. Because I told him what was wild about it. I got to tell him about this vision before it even happened. Because it took so long for it to come back into fruition. I had told him maybe like 6 months after the Float. He was like, okay, that's cool. And I maybe mentioned it a couple more times. At that performance, I got to be like, yo, this was it. Remember the thing I was telling you about? You just did it. He was like, yo. And it was mind-blowing for both of us. Because, certain specific blue and purple lighting. He was wearing a jacket. He put on the jacket just before performing those songs. He wasn't even wearing it most of the performance. And he put on the jacket just before the performance. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is happening.
1 for 1.
Yeah, this is happening.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You mentioned the Sean Kanan Voodoo Players, and I'm thinking about that name. And it's like they're called Voodoo Players because they're channeling the spirit of who they're tributing. Yeah. Alive or not.
Yeah, so meditation has brought those types of visions to my consciousness.
For someone who's never, just like we were asking about Jay Dilla, for someone who's never meditated before, where would you recommend they start?
Honestly, if you have access to YouTube, I would start there. There's a lot of good instructional videos. I think I read a book, but then the thing that actually made more impact on me was a YouTube video. People talking about different types of meditation, like transcendental and different, I don't even know all the terms, but when somebody talked about just focus on your breath and that can be meditation, I was like, oh, I can do that. And then I started doing that, and they were like, at first it's going to be hard to keep thoughts from coming in your mind. They're going to do it. Just try to let it pass. And observe, but don't judge. Don't try to hold on to it. Just let it go as it's gonna come. And eventually you'll get to a point where they're not. At least they're coming slower if they're not, or not coming at all. And that's the moment when you're in that state. I've definitely felt like it's like an energy, like a certain. It's like a frequency change. It's like something. Some shift within. Yeah, something shifts, and I'm no longer just Darian. I'm like, right?
Yeah.
And that's the most amazing. I don't get that every time. I won't say I get that every time. But that happens. And I've done some guided meditations, like we talked about meeting your ancestors. I've done some guided meditations where I've met some ancestors, which have been very powerful too. I can tell you about that if you want, but it's kind of a long story. I could make it short.
For me, my I think top couple of tips for meditation would be, yes, focus on the breath. Many times, counting breath is one that folks recommend. Something that helped me out with being able to kind of control my interpretation of what was coming up or what thoughts were getting in the way of what's called dropping in was to think of a blank piece of paper. Just white. Just blank. Just think of nothing. And it's impossible to think of nothing because something's going to get written on that paper.
Yeah, right.
Something's going to, you're going to be thinking about that paper, but even if you're looking at a piece of paper, even in your mind's eye, you might be thinking about some other things. That's something that has helped me. For my experience, my first time that I really felt like I dropped in was when I first experienced a Tibetan singing bowl or singing bowl of some sort,
Mm.
and feeling that vibration
Mm-hmm.
and that, and having my eyes closed and feeling like I was just diving deeper and deeper into water.
Mm.
I did feel like I went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it was necessarily like me looking at myself from a different spot, but feeling transported.
Yeah. Your consciousness is not necessarily just in the room anymore.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever experienced something paranormal? Have you ever seen a ghost? Have you ever almost died or spoke with a psychic or a medium or been abducted by aliens?
No. I feel like I've interfaced with a ghost before, but there wasn't enough evidence for me as a former scientist to be like, yeah, that was clearly a ghost. Meditation-wise, I've met spirit beings. Okay, so there is a particular meditation that I did that is designed to help you meet your, what they call daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N, which we would, in American colloquial language, probably say your guardian angel. But basically, the belief is that you do have one guide that stays with you your entire life, from birth to death, or from transition to transition, really. And that is the first being you meet when you transition out of this life, because they do help you reacclimate to the other side. And I did a meditation where I met a being that I would consider a being, because it was definitely not part of me or anything that anyone I'd ever seen or experienced before in my life. They had long white hair from the top of their head and their beard, so much so that the white hair was like wrapped around almost like a turban on the head, and the beard was hitting. They were sitting sort of in the lotus position, but on a log bench inside a cave. The whole meditation takes you through a forest. Well, you start in a field, and in the distance there's a forest, and there's a path, and you walk down the path through the field, through the forest, to the side of a mountain. As you're walking around the side of the mountain, there's a cave in the side of the mountain. This is where your being is supposed to dwell. There's a fire outside, and you're supposed to put some wood. There's wood stacked. There's some firewood, and then you put it in the fire to let the being know that you're there, and you announce yourself. They will either invite you in or not, or they may not even be there. You may not even experience this being. That's one of the things they said in the meditation. So the fact that I experienced this being the first time was like, oh, maybe something's going on here. And I asked it its name. What I was experiencing was like inside there's like another fire pit, but it's not fire. There's nothing burning, but you can feel energy coming off of it. And when you look in it, it just looks like a never-ending pit. And so the being was like, it had a bowl, like a wooden bowl, that it would like put down and pick up in my experience, like a split second. But what it would do is like pick up the bowl, stir it really fast, and just put it back down. And what I could see from the bowl looked like the cosmos. It looked like stars inside it. And my interpretation of that was, oh, this is this being interacting in the other beings' lives that it's also in charge of. Like, I was like, there's no way it's just in charge of me. It's probably in charge of millions of people. And so I asked the being its name, and what I heard or understood in my mind's ear was Ryan. And I was like, okay. I didn't really have any other purpose at that time, but I did it again. And the next time I went, well, in between, I found out that there is at least there's a belief that there's a being named Cryon. Mm-hmm. There's a person named Lewis Carroll. Not the person that wrote Alice in Wonderland. Different person. Same name, different person. Yeah, I was like, what? At first when I looked it up.
Yeah, but down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah, right. Just literally. But no, it's a different person. But apparently he was channeling Cryon a bunch during the 70s. And this is like, some people understand Cryon to be Archangel Michael. And there's other interpretations of the same being named Cryon. Same time I did the meditation, Cryon was there, but my spirit seemed to pick up some frustration because I was kind of coming unannounced. It was like not really a time that I really needed to, but I was like looking for my purpose. And so what ended up happening was I didn't go in the cave. A being came out of the cave. That being, in my mind's eye, looked like my grandmother, who I actually shared a birthday with. We were both born on June 17th. I asked her my purpose, and she was like, to educate. And I was like, what? I'm going to be a teacher? No. She's like, no, there's many ways to educate. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. And I was like, okay, is there anything else you want to tell me? And at that moment, she said, tell your dad we're ready for him. This was like last summer. I want to say it was around August, too. That was my second experience. And the last experience, so I had done it 3 times. Last experience I did that, Cryon was there, and I announced myself before I got to the cave. I was like, I know timing is everything. I don't want to interrupt your schedule. And he seemed to be receptive. And so Cryon was there.
So this was last summer?
Uh-huh. This was shortly after my dad passed. Probably like November of last year.
November of last year. Mm-hmm. We have a little bit of a thinner veil.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did it specifically on All Saints Day because of the thin veil.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
And so
All Saints Day, All
November
Saints
1st.
Sunday or November 1st? Okay,
November 1st. And so I went to the cave. Cryon was there. He was cool with me being there. And I was like, cool. I don't want to be annoying. I asked this being, are you in touch with my father? And he said, yes. And I was like, can I see him? And he's like, he's not ready yet. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, there is another being I'm looking for, too, if you have any clue where a person named August would be. And all of a sudden, this black person, in my mind, a black figure materializes on another wooden log bench next to me and Cryon. I look over and I'm like, is this? And at that point, Cryon dematerializes, gone. So it's just me and this figure sitting on the bench. And it was very dark-skinned black person, very muscular, like muscle-bound. I would equate it to something like LeBron James with dreadlocks.
Okay.
He had very long dreadlocks down his back, and he was also sitting in the lotus pose. But he had something wrapped around his, like the gap between your bicep and your shoulder muscle, and it looked like it was like tan, and it looked like there was something circular tied to it, or either that or there was a big knot in it, specifically on the left arm. I was laying down when this was happening, but in my mind I knelt because I was like, respect, show respect, in some way show respect. And so I was like, are you August? And he was like, and the being was like, to you I am August, right? Because obviously that name is not real. That's the names the enslavers gave to him, probably because of the month they purchased. But he was like, to you I'm August. And I was like, okay, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, am I supposed to be doing this documentary thing? And he's like, yes. I was like, okay. Do I need to tell your story? He said, yes. And it was like not saying anything. We were just like communicating telepathically. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay. And I was like, do I need to go to Sierra Leone? And he's like, yes. But first you need to go back to South Carolina. I was like, okay. Interesting. Do I need to go to Europe? And he's like, yes. But again, first you need to go back to South Carolina. I was like, okay. And then in my mind's experience, he grabbed me by my shoulders in the kneeling position, and like your tears just started flowing out of my face, and all I could feel was like, it felt like all the pain from August and his brothers and sisters and parents and all that was like flooding through my body, and I was like, what is happening? And he's like, don't stop at the pain. There's a ton of pain. I'm just giving this to you so that I can also imbue you with this strength to finish the job. And I was like, okay. And I was like, what does that mean? He's like, you got to finish this documentary. And I was like, okay, I'm going to, educate. Right. And I was like, okay, is there anything else you want to tell me? And he was like, literally the last thing he said is like, I just gave you my strength and all the strength of your ancestors so you can do this. So don't worry about it. We've got you. I was like, I need your help. He's like, we got you. And then I went on my way. I went back around out of the cave and back to the forest. And that was the last one I did, was the last November.
Wow.
I feel like that's a supernatural experience, but I don't know if people would consider that because it was during a meditation. But yeah.
I mean, I guess I have, and I haven't like heard of stories like this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm overwhelmed because like it's important.
Yeah, it was so impactful. Oh my God. I could not, I can't tell everybody about this, but like I told Jess, I told Jelani.
We're telling everyone about this while you recorded.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And
I didn't think everybody would understand, I guess is what I'm saying. But hopefully this explanation is sufficient because I think, again, meditation has been a place that has helped me be able to find a center. I don't think if I hadn't meditated before this guided meditation that any of that would have happened because I don't think I would have been in the right frequency vibration for all these things that happened. But the fact that Cryon was there the first time and then has been there every time since and then is introducing me to other spirits, one that I knew before on this realm, and she was so happy to see me. It was so wild. She couldn't stop smiling. I just remember smiling across her face the whole time. When I relayed that message to my dad, it seemed to give him some solace too. Because he knows, well...
It was his mother?
Yeah, it was his mother.
Yeah.
He knows what a therapist told me, I think 2018, that I have the gift of second sight.
Yeah.
So I just, for whatever reason, I have this gift. I do technically have a superpower. And the thing with Laren wasn't the first time in my life that I had dreamed something and then it happened. Because I dreamed something in high school that then happened at Hampton University. And I didn't even know those people. Mm-hmm. So, like, for me to have seen their faces and, like, you know, yeah, it's just really weird. And that's happened to me at least a handful of times in my life.
Many people believe that when we feel that deja vu or I've been here before, or that synchronicity that you're on the right path.
Yeah. Firmly believe that. And my dad said that that's what it means is like deja vu is you being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
For sure.
I don't try to hide my
I appreciate it
because like that's an important message.
Yeah.
And like I feel honored that I get to be a part of sharing that message and helping you on your mission.
For sure. So yeah, just know that we have August's approval.
And strength.
Yeah, and strength. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very excited to talk with others about this and share.
Yeah. Business leaders, whatever, would use whatever influence they had to take back the land. So the overwhelming majority of newly freed African people that got land had it taken back. Apparently in South Carolina, according to a real estate attorney that I talked to about the land, said that in South Carolina in particular, there were a lot of former slave owners that just let the people have the land because they had the guilt. I don't know if there's more guilt there than other places, but for whatever reason, the land that passed to African people stayed in their hands. And so that seems to be because Friday Great is my great-great-great-grandfather. He is Marianne Wigfall's father. And she's the one that is on the deed that I found when I went to South Carolina. So come to find out that it was from Friday Great's estate. It was bought by the county for $19.10 by the sheriff in 1934, and then bought back by his daughter Marianne for $56.10 or 18 cents in 1938. So Friday Great was born enslaved in 1840 and died in 1890 something or like early 1900s because he's still on the deed up to 1915, I believe.
So Marianne Wigfall gets the land back.
Yeah, she bought the land back. So that's the origin. Seems to be from Field Order Number 15. It was taken away, but then she bought it back. And then it's been kind of chipped away ever since then. It originally started as 26.5 acres and now down to 13.
And then your cousin's father was bequeathed this from what...
So yes, so he was the protector of the land. Because he was the deputy sheriff, anybody that had influence, he also had dirt on them. So regardless of them trying to use their influence, he could use their dirt to revoke it. Whatever they were trying to do, it didn't matter. But then he died of COVID in November 2020. So we lost the protection. And then not long after that, some people tried to burn down the house on the land. When a relative was living in, she's not blood Wigfall, but she married into the family and she still lives on the land. They tried to burn her house down twice in 2021 to send a message, and it was in between getting letters to like, hey, you should sell your land or whatever.
That's some 50s stuff.
Yeah, right. And it's so funny because the first time she was scared, but that made her get security cameras. So the second time she got them on camera, and then the news reported it. You can find it if you look up Pawleys Island Wigfall house burning or something like that. You'll find it. People have been trying to get it ever since my cousin's father passed. Mm-hmm. He immediately got a letter from a real estate agent like, and this was during the Trump administration, the president's about to change, you should sell, the laws might change for real estate, you should sell your property as fast as you can. I guess
he was still, yeah, okay.
Yeah. November 20th, the election happened then, but yeah, he wasn't technically out yet because I think the letter came in late November. Mm-hmm. We were like, oh, we need to do something about this because this isn't going to stop. This isn't new. It's not something that hasn't been tried before, but we also don't have our leverage anymore. So yeah, the passing of his father kind of set it all off, and the passing of my father is what puts me in a position to like be making decisions and honestly espousing this story about the family that no one seems to have known before. Even though my cousin Veronica does a lot of Gullah Geechee research, my people on my dad's side, the Wigfalls, are Gullah Geechee people, but I don't think she did it specifically on our family, and so none of this other history about white Wigfalls being captains in the Revolutionary War and the British arms and the Scottish arms. We didn't know anything about that, or Lewis, or I don't even think we knew about August. Someone named John Baker wrote about him, who is...
So Gullah Geechee being from South Carolina or being from Africa?
Yeah, so Gullah Geechee is a South Carolina, Georgia culture of African people that were living on the islands off the coast, and so because of that isolation, they were able to keep more of their culture within the community. So they still have what you might call a circle dance. The language they speak is you would call it Geechee because it's kind of like a broken like English with an African accent. If you hear any of my cousins from that area, you probably would not be able to understand them for a while. It's very similar to Cajun, but not like that, like Southern. It's more, if you ever hear someone that lives in Africa now talking, more sounds like that. I think the islands were called Gullah at one point, so that's where Gullah comes from. And then Geechee is a reclaimed term. It was actually a derogatory term for a long time, but it's reclaimed by the folks there to be their language and their culture.
Well, I really appreciate you espousing all of this and diving into the details with me and helping with production on High Context. Was there anything that I forgot to ask?
I think you got it all tonight. I got notes, but there's like maybe one other question you had that I was like, ooh, that's a good one.
Was there anything about like High Context or what we are, embarking on with sound activism that you'd like to share, or what intention you have for this project?
Sure.
I had something that, a goal. I would love a goal of High Context to be to turn STEM into STEAM, to put the arts in, as just as important as technology and engineering and math and sciences.
Real.
And that for that concept to be more mainstream instead of only a third of the people really knowing about it.
Yeah. I think my intention for High Context as a podcast is to help people understand that we don't live high context lives for the most part. We live in very low context existences and
our systems.
And our systems definitely not force or coerce, but like facilitate us. Provide a framework for us to be in low context and use this podcast as a way to figure out where your high context is for your own life.
And inversely, I see high context culture such as music and arts and cannabis, like, and uncovering the past and education, like all of these are high context realms.
For sure.
Existing within a low context structure, and how can we sometimes, using high context values in a low context world and low context values in a high context world.
Yeah. Both are needed.
Navigating all of this. Yeah.
Going back to the fractals.
Yeah. Are you feeling whole and complete?
Yeah. Thank you. This is a great conversation. I can't wait to interview you next.
I think I may need to Rest up.
Maybe not today.
My origins. You did great on your origin story. I feel like I would take 3 times as long. Just like, and then on this day I did this.
That's okay. I think that's kind of the point of this podcast.
If you're the listener and you got this far.
Yeah, right. If you've listened this far.
Thank you to you
for
engaging and listening.
Man,
where can folks interact with you and your projects?
I am on social media, Facebook, Darian Wigfall, DARIAN WIG, F as in Frank, ALL. Instagram, Darian that's Twitter. X, formerly Twitter, Darian _Wig. Instagram, DJ Wiz, WHIZ _STL. Also have a website, DarianWigfall.com. And the certain media website is allaboutthelevelup.com.
Do you want to tell folks about the last project you worked on, your new EP?
Yeah, I just put out a EP that is a mirror image of a friend's EP, Jelani, who we talked about. Mine is called the Professor EP. That's my production name. Because I like to keep things in different buckets. DJing is different hats. DJing is different than production. It's different than management. So like I try to keep those things kind of separate for people. So yeah, for production I go by the Professor, and then we also through certain media release the Backbeat EP. So the Backbeat EP and the Professor EP are out on streaming platforms now. Please go listen. I would love your feedback. And
I actually
if you want to
added
collaborate.
both to St. Louis Newness 2024.
Thank you.
That one's on Spotify right now, but monthly I'm going to port it over to Tidal.
Okay.
In order to keep in touch with the High Context Podcast. Right now we're just on Instagram at High Context Podcast. And for the future of sound activism, it's just at Sound Activism on Instagram.
Sweet.
And my name's Ace. I go by Atomic Ace these days. So my Instagram handle is at I am Atomic Ace.
Sweet.
My personal right now is at Ace the Girl from Space. That one's kind of had the longest, so kind of keeping that legacy a little bit. Well. And we'll be doing this with many other guests. Lots of potential guests came up in this conversation.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
A mission of High Context is to help facilitate and inspire all power to all the people. So I think we're gonna sign off with that, with each time. And when we said it earlier together, it really resonated with both of us. So we'll sign off.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All power to all the people.
Thanks for listening.